Hello and welcome back to the top 85 games for the BBC Micro Video Countdown. In at number 61, it's a bit of a controversial choice because this game is something of a Marmite game. It's Pod. Now, this game was published by Acorn Soft in 1984 and was developed by A.S.K Software, that's A.S.K in uppercase, and the designer of the game was a chap called Don Walton. Now, this loosely, I suppose, comes under the heading of an educational game. It was aimed at very young computer users, and it was designed really to teach children verbs. That's basically the premise of the game, if you can call it a game. So the eponymous pod, who is, as we shall see, a slightly strange-looking red potato-headed individual, can be asked to do any number of different verbs, and if you guess a verb correctly, he carries out the verb. So it's not necessarily what we might call a typical game. There's not really any sort of aim to it. You don't win any points. It's not really an adventure either. So it is a bit of an outlier in the BBC Micro universe. But first of all, it's original, and second of all, many people who would have had a BBC Micro or access to one when they were very young, as I was, will definitely remember Pod. So without further ado, let's go and meet him. Okay, welcome to Pod. Copyright A.S.K Software and published by Acorn Soft. Now then, we have two options with Pod. We can either just find out what he can do, or we can join together multiple actions and he'll execute them in sequence. So we're just going to go with option one because there's not really any difference other than you have to type in the different commands. And here is Pod. Now, he's a bit of an odd looking character, but let's see if we can cheer him up a little bit. Lovely. Interesting, he doesn't really smile with his eyes there at all. But of course, we can also make him unhappy. Oh, very grumpy looking Pod there. Now he can do things which don't just involve his face. So, for example, if we take him for a stroll, off he goes. His legs and arms obviously sort of, I don't know, maybe they retract into his body when he's not walking. It's that little wink there, you can get him to do that multiple times if you feel like it. There we go. And I think you can make him blink as well. Yes. Now, let's face it, if you were a child, you would have tried all manner of different verbs because you wouldn't have had a list of commands at your disposal, no internet to look up all the different things that Pod could do. So let's face it, we would have all tried this at some point. Oh no, Pod can't burp. I won't go any further than that down the road of dirty things that we could try and make Pod do. Rest assured, it's a children's game, so he can't do any of those things that you might be thinking of. But he can glide upwards. There you go, and he kind of goes for a little spin there. Yep, lovely. Seems to go on for quite a while. And he's back again. Let's see. Now there are some other things that I remember he can do. He can jump. There he goes. And down again. Natty little pair of black shoes, I've just noticed. Now let's see what else. Oh, let's see if we can get him to talk, shall we? Well, there you go. I like the fact that his nose goes up and down while he's talking. That's quite clever. So he can talk. I wonder if he can eat as well. Let me see if we can get him to eat. There you go. He can eat as well. And his little cheeks puff out as well. And let's see. I think if we get him to sneeze. Oh, yep. There he goes. Wow. It's quite an explosion. I think I've heard that sound effect in many games, actually, usually used for the detonation of a bomb. I think he can cough as well. It just seems to be a sort of repeat of the sprite there. You'll notice the game recycles things quite a bit. Now, the marketing for Pod suggested that he could perform up to 120 different actions, but as you'll see, some of them look remarkably similar to some of the others. So, for example, walk, you can also try stroll, and he'll do exactly the same thing. If you ask him to chew, it's exactly the same as if you were to ask him to eat. But let's face it, the point of the game was to teach children or try and get them to discover different verbs. So the fact that he happens to repeat his sprites is, well, I think we should hold that against dear old Pod. Now let's see if I can remember a few others. I think he can fly, which I'm feeling is different from, is slightly different from gliding. I mean, interestingly, that he he's, in order to fly, he appears to need to cough as well, which I think is interesting. And down he comes again. I think we can also get him to go all the way off the screen. Oh no! There he goes! Bye bye, Pod. He'll come back. I think we can get him to do the opposite as well. He doesn't seem so concerned about that, actually. There you go. I always wondered about that flower over on the sort of left-hand side there, because it doesn't seem to play any role at all. I mean, no matter what kind of commands you put in, it doesn't seem to get Pod to, you'd think if you made him eat, maybe he'd eat the flower, but he can't do that. Let's see, can he count? No, he can't count. Oh, I think he can hop, I remember. Oh, there you go. That's nice, isn't it? You can get a little wink at the end too. Can you get him to gasp? Oh, there you go. I think you can also get him to stare, which is just creepy if you ask me. Um, yes, now what else do I remember he can do? Oh yes, he can yawn, I think. Let's see if we can get him to do that. Oh, so terrible, Pod. So tiring. He can snore? Ah, yes, that's just a sort of it's just an extension of the yawn, complete with puffed out cheeks as well. Now we got him to walk. I think we can get him to run as well. Oh, there he goes. Olympic Pod. Yes, splendid stuff. So I think you can already begin to appreciate from what we've seen so far that this is not the most exciting game in the world, but if you try and put yourself in the sort of the mind of a child in the 80s playing something like this was highly entertaining actually because um, just getting the ability to control something on the screen and make it do things, it appeals to children, I think. And all right, I appreciate that looking at this sort of in the cold hard light of 2019, it doesn't seem like it's particularly exciting, and some of the things that he does are rather repetitive, but I still have quite a sort of fondness for Pod. I know some people hate this game. I've certainly done my fair share of Googling to find plenty of people that cannot stand Pod and think that it's a ridiculous game. But I don't know. I've always quite liked it myself, and I can certainly remember playing. I think I played it at school the first. I think our school had a copy of Pod, and then I think my dad managed to get a copy of it, which I had at home as well, and I experimented not, I won't go to say as far as experimenting for many hours because you do get bored of Pod after a while, but I thought that I would end the video with perhaps the most exciting of the Pod commands, especially for people actually who are not particularly keen on Pod. So here we go. Pod can pop. There you go. Isn't that exciting? Yes, this also comes in a variety of different flavors as well. So Pod can explode. It does much the same thing. And just in case you haven't had quite enough of that, we'll go for Pod can burst. So there you go. I think that probably gives us all we need to see from Pod. I imagine that there's a few verbs that I haven't actually managed to demonstrate in this video. But if you're that curious, why not go and download a copy of Pod from the complete BBC Micro Games archive and experiment for yourself. But for now, I'm going to say goodbye, and we'll say farewell to Pod as well. and I hope you'll join me next time.